were responding to the first part, but do you think my second part was what do you think about that? Okay, so we're talking about the burden of proof.
Yes.
Okay, so if we don't want to use positive and negative, which I could say that could be a bit problematic considering there are some negative claims that you'd probably reasonably say, oh well, actually, no. But you could say that you could prove them, but we just use the general rule of positive. But would you say that a better thing would be whenever someone makes an assertion?
Yeah, I would say that, like, whenever you make any claim at all, you have the burden of proving it, and if it's, like, something that you can't prove, then you don't make that claim.
Okay, so like for example, would you say that would you say that saying something like "I can't," that we can't know this is an assertion?
Yes. Yes, I would say that it is an assertion, yeah.
So would so let's say we're talking about positions on God. Would agnostic be an assertion?
Yeah.
Okay. So then every claim actually like everything we do is an assertion.
Um, yeah, like, any time that you say that it is the case, that, I don't know, that P, like, any sort of statement that you make, I would call that an assertion, and that does include negative statements.
Oh, okay. So in that case, how would you go about proving something? Or how would you go about not proving necessarily, because that I feel like that would imply like empirical stuff, but like reasoning out. Um, okay, this is why we don't know if God exists or not.
When it comes to that, you argue, when it comes to, like, things that you can prove, like, deductively, you just argue from definitions and from axioms. When it comes to like claims of the world, you would just go, you would basically try to see, like, what's more likely, that this thing exists or that it doesn't exist. So like, so let's say that someone were to posit that actually lightning comes from else at the sky, and they just shit it out onto the world. That's when lightning happens. And now we say, oh, okay, so how likely is that, compared to our current explanation? I don't know it off the top of my head, so I won't say it. But like, which one's more likely? And by that we take, well, generally, um, two claims. Like, let's say claim P and claim Q. Like, individually, they have some percentage chance of being true. But if you say that they are both true together, that is less likely than them being true individually, like, necessarily. So we take that. So we take that same sort of principle with these sort of claims. Like, okay, so we'd have to establish first that else exist, um, and
So is this
and and also that they're up in the sky, that they're shooting out lightning, that they can do that. You'd have to establish so much.
Occam's razor?
Yeah, basically.
Are you? I'm guessing you're aware with some of the problems of Occam's razor.
Um, I haven't really looked into it too much, but would
So
one of them
one
be that just because something has less assumptions doesn't mean that it's actually more
Well, no.
true?
From what I know, there's two parts of Occam's razor. So there's not only the less assumptions, so the simplicity factor, but there's also the how much does it explain factor. So that's the best argument. That's the best thing we should do. Is the simplest thing that describes the most. That's what we should make our inference to. The issue is with this is that this could easily be used for like God being the justification behind things instead of science because God could both justify or God could both explain science, the natural world and the supernatural world, while science can only explain the natural world.
Okay, yeah, so you'd say that, so the argument would be that all the claims made in science can be made through, like, the lens of God?
Yes.
Um, okay. and that God can even explain things beyond science too.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah,
In that case, we just use like the burden of proof and say, well, you're claiming that God is a better explanation than science. So no, please prove to me that God exists.
do you think you're making an implicit assertion there, though, that science is like science is a better explanation than God is?
Yes, yes, you are. And you would also need to defend that. In a good defense, from the looks of it, would be to say, um, sure, like it could be the case that God exists and all that, and that if he does exist and captures all the claims made in science, he would also capture the claims that science can't explain. Then cool, God is better, but you'd first have to establish that God is real, um, or something like that. So you just say, well,
Mhm.
please prove to me that God is real, or that God is likely to be real. And for now, I'll just say I don't know that God is real, so I won't act as if he is real.
Okay, yeah. Uh, yeah. So basically, with that, so let's say we have two people who are aware of this. The fact that you're implicitly making an assertion when you say, "Prove to me that like God is a better explanation than science," or that God is real. Um, so we have two people who are extremely aware of this, and are also like quite antiquated and quite good at debate and like debate tactics. So if they get into a discussion with each other, how do we prevent them from just getting into an infinite regress of saying, "Well, no, you need to prove that. Well, no, you need to prove that." If we're taking the definition of any assertion has the burden of proof.
Then we take it from like a sort of neutral perspective where we just suspend a judgment. Like we aren't claiming that science is better, that God is better at explaining things, and we take a look at like what each of them is saying, because the religious person isn't saying science should not be trusted, or that science or that all of science is false, but that anything science can do, God can do. God can explain, and God can explain things science can't. So like uh, the person that believes in God, that is making the assertion that God is a better explanation than science, is already saying science is an explanation. So we don't need to prove science there. Like they both agree. Um, in once we encounter like a disagreement, like I don't know, which one is actually better, or something like that, or like whether God is real or not, depending on, like if the science person is a hard atheist and says God is not real, then it's just basically a coin flip at that point. Like okay,
Yeah.
either one of you can go first. Who cares?
Oof. So, is there any way we could reconcile the positive versus negative distinction for the burden of proof instead of the assertion, non-assertion one that we
Um.
did?
hmm. So, are you asking, like, is there any way where we can still use positive and negative to tell who has the burden of proof without going off into, like, incoherence or inconsistency?
Yes.
Um, hmm. You could say that no, that wouldn't work. You could say that we should use the simplest form of any claim, and that would work for like things that are doubly negated, because the simplest form would just be the positive claim. But when it comes to negative claims, a simpler you could just say that a simpler form would be the positive claim, um, like the thing like with K1 being it is raining, K2 being like it is not the case that it is raining, and K3 being a positive claim, it is the case that K2. That would be simpler than K2, like it is not raining, unless you use some different definition of what is simple. Because I would just say, oh, the least amount of connectives.
Yeah, and then with the not thing, you get back to what I was saying, where you have the where in one way you could basically be treating not P as its own as a singular statement, while in another you could be treating not and the not, the negation, and P as two separate things, which is what would make it a negative claim, while treating it as not P as like a singular proposition that would be a positive claim.
Yeah, then we get into, well, what is really a negative claim then? Like, what do we mean by that? A negative claim? Is it just a claim? Like you take a positive claim and you just negate it? You take the opposite of it, or you say that it is not the case, that this is that the positive claim is real or true? Like, what do we mean by a negative claim then?
Yeah, I'd say that with that is that this is something where our systems of like formal logic can't really help us because we'd have to purely do it based off semantics, and even the semantics could give you the same formalization while meaning different things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like we know that like both semantically and logically, a doubly negated statement is equivalent and replaceable with a positive statement. So like we know that. So we need to like be specific in what we mean by positive and negative. If these two things can be interchangeable, at least in some cases.
All right. I'm sorry, could you repeat some of that? Someone
Sure, it's fine.
yeah, came in my room.
So like when it comes to semantically and both logically, like we know that a doubly negated statement is replaceable with a positive statement. So like we know that there's a relationship of replaceability with a certain kind of negative statement and a certain kind of positive statement. Like you can actually replace those. Like they mean the same thing. So we need like a good definition of if we're going to use positive and negative to determine the burden of proof, we need a good definition of positive and negative statements, such that they are no longer replaceable.
Yeah,
And I
for sure.
don't know what that would be.
Yeah, that'd be pretty difficult to do, I'd say. So how would you get out of the paradox that seems to be created with the assertion one, where pretty much everything you do is an assertion? What would be a non-assertion?
A non-assertion would just be not speaking. That would be the only non-assertion that really exists. Just not saying anything. It's the only way to get out of it.
Are you sure that suspending judgment wouldn't be? Is that a kind of assertion when you say something like "I'm going to suspend my judgment on this"?
Um. Hmm. Okay, yeah, that is also a type of like non-assertion where like you are asserting that you are suspending judgment. Um. Sure, but like you aren't really claiming anything about the claim in question directly. Like
Yeah, but
if we were to be presented that, oh, P is the case, and someone else comes along and says that P is actually false, and it is not the case that P, and both sides make horrible arguments for it, and you just say, well, I won't say that P is true, but I also won't say that not P is true. I'll just say that once a better argument is presented for it, I don't know which one's which. So you just say, oh, P could be true or not P could be true. Either of them.
Or
And
can you
that
do
would
the
be a
same
type of...
with God? You could say, well, there aren't really good arguments for either, so I'm going to, or there's no evidence for either, so I'm going to suspend my judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I believe that fundamentally that's what the agnostic claim would be, is that there could be multiple types of the agnostic claim. Someone could be like, we don't know if God exists, but another could, a lot of the fundamental beliefs behind picking the agnostic position or being the agnostic is like, okay, we can't know this, so I'm going to suspend judgment on this, as either side doesn't have enough good evidence or reasoning for me to believe one of those.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be a claim that, like, if you were proven, like, if it was proven that God exists or that God doesn't exist, you wouldn't be any more wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But would you say that the burden of proof is an obligation?
Well, metaphysically, I mean, nothing's an like metaethically, nothing's an obligation. But if we're talking about in terms of having a conversation with someone, or like being intellectually honest, then I'd say probably it would be something you would want to strive towards to fulfill the burden of proof if you were to have it.
Okay, so you'd say that it's not an obligation, like, normatively or metaethically, but it is, but it's sort of like a, how do I explain it? It's sort of like a hypothetical imperative where, like, if you want to achieve this, then you use this method. Something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes,
Yes.
so then you go.
If you want to reach like intellectual agreement or have a good intellectual discussion, then if you are, and this is like multiple if thens, then if you are and if you have the burden of proof, then you should try and bridge that. You should try and give that proof.
Gotcha. So then the burden of proof is a sort of like an obligation in the same way that any other, like, law of logic or any other theory of truth, of what truth is also a sort of, it brings with it obligations. In that, in that, like, it doesn't come from any normative system or any meta-ethical claim, but it's just something that you assume.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah, then I guess to end this, you'd say that you'd say that we should change the burden of proof until someone gives, like, a definition of positive and negative claim that wouldn't be interchangeable.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was all.
All right.